Good evening, race fans. Welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host as we discuss this past week in racing and preview next week. First off, let me introduce you to the panel I have assembled tonight. With me, as always, Mr. Gray Warren from Richard Childress Racing, Mr. Richard Youden, and from Indycar.com, Joey Barnes. How is everybody tonight?
Doing great.
Very good, thank you.
All right, great to have you all here again. Like I say, it's the highlight of my week to talk to you guys, and Richard feels sad for me as always. But yes. But let's quickly knock out the headlines. Sad news coming out of today. Sergio Marconi has passed away. We know him as a giant of the auto industry, former CEO at Fiat Chrysler, and very involved in the Ferrari team. So, our thoughts and prayers are with his friends and family and folks he knew. This past weekend, Indycar had the weekend off. Formula One was at Hockenheim, where Sebastian Vettel was leading handily and made a mistake in the rain, opening the door for Lewis Hamilton to come up from 14th to take the win. A lot of conversation we'll have about that later. And NASCAR was in New Hampshire in another event that was plagued by some rain, delayed the start for a while, but at the end of the day, it was Kevin Harvick bumping and banging Kyle Busch out of the way to take his win of the season. The IndyCar had the weekend off, and speaking of IndyCar, we have a very special guest in the studio. I'd like to introduce you to the race engineer of the number 27 Honda-powered Andretti Autosport machine that's driven by Alexander Rossi, Mr. Jeremy Milless, in the studio with us today. Jeremy, good evening, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. You forgot NAPA.
NAPA. Always got to plug the sponsors. Yep, and I'll tell you what, that blue and yellow NAPA livery is just beautiful and classic. Been in racing a long time. I know I've got a couple of Rossi diecast. I've got the Indy 500 winner, but then when they come out with the new car, I said, well, I got to get the new car. So, but good looking car that you work on there. But so I just wanted to ask you quickly, about your background. I mean, did you grow up as a race fan with designs on working in racing when you grew up, or did you just kind of find that your particular education and training had practical applications that led you into racing?
So one of my uncles had a machine shop that built race engines. So when I originally started, I wanted to be an engine builder, so I went to a technical college and was like, I want to build race engines. And then as I was driving, I was in Lima, Ohio, and I lived in Columbus, so it's like 120 mile an hour, or 120 mile drive each way. And every day I would pass this Formula Atlantic team, which is like the feeder series to the IndyCar series back then. And I just stopped in one day and was like, hey, you guys need help? And they were like, can you use a computer? And I was like, yeah. And then I started doing that for a while, and I was like, I don't want to build engines anymore. So I went back to school and got an engineering degree and went from there.
Now you've worked for Panther Racing. You worked under John Menard. You were with Penske for a while. Most recently, before working with the Andretti team, you were with Sarah Fisher and Ed Carpenter, where you worked with Joseph Newgarden. That was your first gig as a race engineer. So you worked your way up from the bottom, so to say.
Yeah, I also did a stint with Bill Davis Racing in NASCAR for a bit with Tommy Baldwin, but
yes, you did.
I had enough. So I went back north.
I remember when you were there. Yes, sir.
I still talk to Tommy a lot.
Yeah, I talk to Tommy too as well.
What a small world. You and Gray work together. Interesting.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry. I send you my most deep condolences.
Yeah. So you've worked in IndyCar. You've worked in NASCAR. Now, Gray, you've got a question about how the day-to-day operation is different.
Yeah, Jeremy. You know how we operated in NASCAR and how the for lack of a better term, the bureaucracy kind of starts out, with your crew chief, and you got your car chief and that kind of stuff, and it filters down. You have your shop foremans and things like that. For our listeners out there, how does the IndyCar shop operate? Does it operate in much the same way as a NASCAR shop does? And also kind of take us through a typical race week where you get back in the shop on Monday morning and you start preparation and to go out for the next week?
I would say it operates, it's just there's fewer people because we don't have to prepare as many cars. But it operates in the exact same manner. We just have different titles. Like the race engineer in Indycar racing is essentially the crew chief in NASCAR, and the race engineer in NASCAR would be the assistant engineer in IndyCar racing, and then it just kind of goes on down. The car chief, crew chief kind of thing works exactly the same.
Are you responsible
as NASCAR?
Are you responsible for basically? Do you come in with your setup guys and things like that, and you're responsible for the setup that's going to go in the car for the upcoming weekend and all the particular changes and what the package you're gonna install on the race car for the week? Do you kind of set forth that protocol and then send it down to your guys to prepare the car?
Yeah, like I said, essentially the same as NASCAR. So I get together with my simulation group and my assistant engineer, and we get together and we run through. First thing is look at what we did last year, what we tested, how we performed, and are we going to start there? Are we going to start somewhere different? And then we go from there, and then run through as many simulations as we can to get prepared for directions we might have to go, because as you guys know on the panel, that you might show up with a car that you're expecting to understeer, and you only have changes set up to or picked out to fix understeer, and you show up and you're loose and you're like, oh boy. so we go through and we just come up with a list of ideas and directions to go, and then we move forward from there.
As far as personnel on the road, do you how many people are you under your direction at the racetrack to take care of the 27?
Probably, let's see, I'd say 15 or 20 total people per car in IndyCar.
Okay.
So there's 4 mechanics, a crew chief, then there's a data acquisition engineer, an assistant engineer, a race engineer, race strategist, which is on my car is actually the general manager of the team as well. And then there's the truck drivers and other pit guys. So.
Okay.
Now, I did want to ask you about the relationship between yourself and the race strategist, who Rob Edwards calls the strategy on the car there. Do you guys confer very closely on strategy, or does that kind of just lie with him and you're more with the car? Or have there been any times you guys are just been diametrically opposed to what strategy you should run?
I would say Rob's braver than I am most weekends. So a lot of the strategy starts out with the race engineer and the assistant engineer. We do a lot of prep work, and then we hand it off to Rob because he doesn't have as much time to dedicate to that because he's running the team, the entire team, not just the IndyCar side, but the Formula E team and the supercar team in Australia and all that. So we prepare, these are what we think is going to happen. This is what we think is going to happen. And then we get together before the race, and we have about a 30-minute meeting with the driver and our engine tech from Honda. And we go over what we think is going to happen, and we go from there. But a lot of times, especially road course racing, oval racing is pretty much a standard strategy because you can get trapped by yellows really easy where you don't in road courses. So road courses, it ebbs and flows a lot, so you just have to be ready to make a quick decision. So we are analyzing data live as we're watching the race, what our gap is, where we're going to come out on track, which was what we call a ghost car. So we have a ghost car set up for where we're going to be on track. So if we're going to come out into an open slot between cars and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
See, now Gray often mentions whenever NASCAR's on a road course that they work the strategy backwards. Is that similar in IndyCar as well?
The pre-event, yes, that's how we do it. We're trying to, one of the things when we were doing Iowa, because the tires had such a fall off. It was how many pit stops are we going to do? And it was, well, if we do an extra pit stop in here, our lap time is going to be this, and we'll actually get to the checkered flag 20 seconds before the car that does 2 stops or did 3 stops, however many, the minimum. I think it was 3, and we were going to do 4. And so it was, we'll get there 30 seconds before. That's if we can get through traffic as quickly as we predicted, and if there's no yellows and things like that. So yes, you start by working backwards and coming up with, okay, these 3 strategies seem to work, and then you kind of watch what's going on in the race to see which one you need to pick, I would say is what mainly happened.
Excellent. Now, Joe, you've got a question, sir?
Yeah, I was actually kind of wondering, you've dealt with Joseph Newgarden, and you've dealt with Rossi for a little bit more than a season and a half here. Can you compare maybe a little bit of what you see out of both of them from a feedback perspective? Like, is Rossi similar to Newgarden or a little bit more animated? I mean, can you describe a little bit of that?
Yeah, like I would say their driving styles are super similar. Like it was really nice because like the kind of setups I developed with Joseph kind of continued to work with Alex because they're both very hard braking, and they both like even like their throttle tip in. We have maps for how the throttle map tips into the engine. They both run very aggressive throttle tip in, so they like to rotate the car with the throttle a lot, and so like it was very similar. And like when I was at ECR, we were the only car that had that super aggressive throttle tip in, and when I'm at Andretti, we're the same thing. We're the only car that has the super aggressive tip in. Everybody else is like this really digressive curve, and we're very progressive curve, and they're really different. So yeah, I'd say they're very similar. Like Joseph is much more, I don't know, he's better on TV than Alex is. Alex is just as funny and great to hang out with as Joseph, but he's, on TV, he's just kind of quiet and like, I just want to do my job and get out of here. So whereas Joseph's like, yeah, let's talk. And
well, let me ask you this one. Whenever you've got a guy like Alex, who, for my money, I look at him and he's like a bulldog on a racetrack. I mean, that guy he's tenacious. He goes after it each and every lap. He's giving it everything. Do you get how anxious do you get on that? Up on that box, just whenever you see him, like St. Pete, when we see him at Detroit. I mean, how tough does it make you, or how stressed do you get whenever you watch him try to tear through the field and make some moves that he does?
He hasn't. So, like with Joseph, his first couple of years, there was a race in Brazil that we stopped because we had no more front wings. And Joseph was really embarrassed at the end of the race because they came and gave him a trophy for the fastest race lap, but yet we had to stop because we're like, we don't have any more front wings. You've hit everything. But with Alex, I haven't had that yet, so I haven't ever had to like pull the reins back. I just like let him go. Like well, you obviously know what you're doing, and if you want to go high line and try and pass everybody, like albeit go for it. So
fair enough. All
right, now Richard, you've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, one of the things that you see a lot in, especially where I come from in the Formula One world, is driver coaching from the standpoint. How much do you really have to do that, or is it? I often see it's the Formula One guys. They've got so many people doing everything that they're trying to hit every little mark possible, and some of this driver coaching goes a little bit over the top to my mind. Is that something you have to do with the guys in IndyCar?
So when I was at ECR, we'll call it Sarah Fisher Racing, then it became CFH Racing, then it became ECR. So when I was at that group of teams and running Joseph, we had Barry Waddell as a driver coach, and I give him a lot of credit for bringing Joseph to where he was. And myself, honestly, at that point, Joseph and I were struggling too hard to make a car that was able to make the ultimate lap time, but it was way too hard to drive. So we rarely would transfer rounds in qualifying because Joseph couldn't do the perfect lap. But if he could, it was like, oh yeah, we're fast.
Yeah.
So Barry kind of pulled the reins back on us and was like, just give him something he can drive and let him go do his craft. And so we started doing that, and we started having success. And then when it became ECR racing, we have Lee Bentham, who is also a super coach. And he does a lot of other stuff, like he does dartfish and things for the team. So, at that team we did. At Andretti, we have zero driver coaching, so I have to kind of step back into that role, which I don't really enjoy doing. I prefer having a driver coach, because especially if the driver is doing something wrong, I would prefer somebody else talk to him. That way that, we don't get any feathers ruffled between the two of us. If I'm saying, oh, you're doing this wrong, it's easier for me
you get in the car and drive it,
Yeah, that wouldn't work. I wouldn't fit.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that about Joseph being a very, to start with, putting the a complete lap together. When I first started out in Formula 1, I was working with Takuma Sato at Honda, and he was exactly the same. That guy was just so fast, so fast.
Yeah,
if you could,
and like one of the bravest guys.
Oh, just a completely crazy man. But if you could qualify based on sector times, the guy would be phenomenal. But it's interesting how learning that sort of craft of racing and that diligence of putting a complete lap together. It may not be as spectacular, and you may not get the car going sideways as often. But I'll tell you, your spare parts guys are a lot happier.
Yeah, I agree. Like J.R. Hildebrand, I worked with him at Panther, and he's one of those guys that, man, there's always really good segments, but it never got put together to produce the right lap. And there's a lot of times, even with Alex, we'll be at weekends and we'll be like going through the timing and scoring, and I'll be like, oh man, we're like 7th here, and like our best segment we're 2nd, but we're like 5th to 7th for everywhere. And I'm like, yeah, but we're 2nd, right? So like, no, the guy who's got 3 first also has a 15th down here. So, we just got to stick with what we're doing and go forward. So.
And I guess you sort of try and build that into the car setup a little bit as well, especially if you're at some of these road courses where you have quite distinct, setup of the track and sectors of the track. You've got to try and find that balance so that you're not really fast in one sector, but then that compromises the rest of the track. And I guess that's working with the driver style and the driver setup to try and find that balance.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there was a year with Joseph at Baltimore. There was a chicane on the front stretch, and Joseph was a half second faster than any other car through there. But we were like 12th in every other sector. But we qualified like 4th. So we're like, okay, we'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that, obviously has been one of the hot topics in IndyCar this season, but any chance that you guys are expanding your driver lineup next year?
I mean, there's lots of rumors about the McLaren thing and that, but I have no idea.
No, you'd be the last to know, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. And then the rumor of Scott Dixon coming over, that would be pretty amazing. I'd love to work with that guy. So.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I heard a rumor today that Alonso was headed back to Ferrari now that Sergio was out of the picture. I'm like, wow, you wrote that fast.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Yeah. So, but now that we're talking about this and the moves, I want to ask you, Jeremy, about just like the overall health of the series. There was a lot of optimism coming into this year with the new car, new teams on board. But then we've got, a couple of kick in the pants things like Phoenix being dropped, and things like that. But, overall, is the mood around the paddock and the garages still quite optimistic? The NBC deal for next year and whatnot. What's everybody's, kind of feeling about the overall health and well-being and future of the series?
Well, there's optimists and there's pessimists and there's realists, and so I think everybody's really excited about the new TV package because it seems like they're willing to put in more effort than the former group did. So everybody's really excited about that. I think from what I've read, the streaming rights aren't quite as good as the old streaming rights were, so that's a negative, but I think everybody's pretty excited about that. And then, tracks come and go. I love oval racing, but man, if we could have street courses every single weekend, like we pack fans into them, and they're great events because I don't know what it is about racing, but racing in general is dying in my book. Like I watch everything, and everything's TV ratings are down. But so's the NFL. The NFL TV ratings are down. NBA TV ratings are down. So yeah, I don't know. I guess to me, I kind of watch just how many people show up because I can't see how many people are watching on TV, and like a lot of our street course races are crazy packed, and they're great atmospheres, and people can come and get their, because people have a much shorter attention span these days, it seems like, so they can come and get their 30 minutes of IndyCar, and then they can go, drink some beer and eat some hot dogs and walk around and, have a, carnival atmosphere almost.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there, because I think when they have the street things, they get the town or the community involved, and it becomes more of a festival type atmosphere, and it probably does bring in, it's a once a year thing, and they bring out a festival of speed, if you will. They bring out the fans.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at, I love airplanes, and that's my passion. And if you look at, the Red Bull Air Racing Series, they go to Texas, and it dies after 1 year, and they come to Indy, and it's a pretty good show, but then they do the one, I think it's downtown Budapest, and it's 500,000 people piled in the streets just watching them. It's I think that's what most events, and I think that's what NASCAR needs to move to as well. I think it would help them a bunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a whole new generation that is not as captivated by automobiles and automobile racing as us older guys have been. It's like my son is 20. He's had his driver's license since he's 16. Still rides his bicycle everywhere. He doesn't want to own a car. He's not worried about it. But there's tons of young people like that with these short attention spans. So I guess it's crafting the sport or crafting the event to make it more palatable to the younger generation. And to your point, these street circuits, where there's so much going on, you can watch a little bit of the race, or you go see this a live band playing in turn 3 or whatever, and just to try to reach out to that new generation. And sometimes I think races just need to be shorter. No, not IndyCar races. The 2 hour, I think the 2 hour thing there works well. But now, Jeremy, I wanted to ask you about the IndyCar schedule, because my good friend Robin Miller often writes that the IndyCar schedule is absolutely grueling on the crews, where they have this compressed schedule and these races back to back and testing in between. And you're a family man. Robin writes that you're keeping these guys away from their family for so long because they don't have shop guys and road guys. But is it that grueling? And is there a way to kind of fix that?
So having worked in NASCAR, I would say that we work more hours than most of the NASCAR crews, but we do it for a shorter portion of the season. So I think it kind of equalizes. Like we got back from Toronto, and so we landed at 2:00 in the morning, got home, back at the shop at 9:00 the next morning. So I got to bed at 3, got to the shop at 9, worked until probably 5, and then I came to my house and worked until probably 10 or 11, and then back the next day, to kind of do the same thing from 8 to 5, and then back home, and then I worked from 7 to 11 at home. And then we got on a bus, and we went to St. Louis from 7. We got on the bus at 7 in the morning, went to St. Louis, tested from 1:00 in the afternoon till 11:00 at night, loaded up at midnight, drove back home, and got home at 5:00 in the morning to go in the next day at noon to get the cars ready for Mid-Ohio. So, yeah, it's hard.
It's good fun, though, isn't it? It's good fun.
And for that compressed time period from what you guys start, and of course you have your preseason tests at Sebring and stuff in late February, then you start mid-March, and then you run through September. Obviously, it is very compressed. But when it comes to the off season, you guys have the longest off season in motorsports, and I know a lot of smaller teams kind of they lay off people, they furlough people and stuff. You have the fortune of working with one of the larger teams that has other interests. What do you guys do in the off season at Andretti? How does your off season compare to NASCAR? We have a short off season where we work probably our busiest time of the year is from Thanksgiving to 3 weeks beyond Daytona.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of the same. So I think the main difference between NASCAR and IndyCar is we just don't have as many, as large of group, as many personnel. So when there's only really one team, which I would say is probably Penske now. There used to be Penske and Ganassi that have the capability to do much development work during the season, except for like a little bit of 7-post testing. Well, I mean, a lot of 7-post testing, but no major part development during the season because you just don't have the personnel at the shop to do it. So when our off season comes, it's bam, we're full mode, to trying to develop the car to go quicker.
Okay.
So it's really busy still.
So
like when I was at
your design and development ramps up after what you're saying basically after September, and you start doing your simulation and use the shaker rig and the 7-post and all that. All that stuff ramps up and continues through the off season. Correct? Yeah.
Well, we still 7-post test and wind tunnel test and all that during the season, but that's as much as we can do. It's when we're in the off season is product design. So we all learn how to use CAD again because we haven't used it for 6 months, and then we start filling up the machine shop and backing them up, and yeah. So it's basically that. It's all design work in the off season. And you were saying that some teams lay people off, and I would say that I don't know of any teams that are, except for teams that maybe might close their doors, but I don't think anybody has the ability to do that anymore, which is a good thing.
That is a good thing. I mean, I've heard where some team, and of course I'm basing my limited knowledge on things I've read, in years past and stuff. But that is good because we had heard, that some of the smaller teams that just didn't have the work and the capability would furlough some folks during the and then used a lot of contract labor and stuff like that during the season. Yeah.
Yep. I'll tell you, there's been years when when the team has talked when the team is like offered or mentioned maybe giving you a few or 2 months off, and it's like, man, it's kind of tempting. Like, no pay. Yeah, I think I can swing that. I'm like, but 2 months to just
Yeah. Just now, Joey, you've got another question?
Yeah. I've talked to Rossi and a bunch of other drivers about this because we have always been, from the media standpoint, we've always had to compare what the old kit did versus this universal aero kit. But from an engineering perspective, I mean, what are some of the challenges that you face in trying to get the edge whenever you have a universal aero kit that 1 through 24 on the grid has? I mean, how do you where do you try to find that edge? Is it the damper program? Is it little mechanical things? I mean, what can y'all do to try to get that edge every weekend?
It's tiny little bits in every single area and adding them up. Like the uprights that the tires actually bolt to, the spindle that the wheel bolts to, finding 1/10 of a horsepower there, and then finding, 2 pounds of drag in the wind tunnel, and, we were able to take 3 pounds off the car, so now we've got a better weight distribution. It's the sum of many minuscule changes is what makes you faster with the universal aero kit.
I guess, and then to that point, I mean, which do you enjoy a little bit more from an engineering standpoint? Did you enjoy what we had previously, or are you really enjoying what you've got now?
I think they're kind of the same for us because they're both still given to us, right? We can't go out and design a new wing or anything like that. So for us, it's kind of the same thing. It's just both engine manufacturers have the same product now. So there's no excuse that, oh, we're not going to be good at this circuit, but we'll be really good at this circuit anymore, right? So now you have to be just as good as everybody at every circuit, whereas with the Honda Aero kit, we were really good on super speedways and average on road courses and street courses and really poor on short ovals. Now we have no excuse, and we have to be as good as everybody else all the time. So I think that's really the only difference to us because, like I said, it's given to us from the manufacturer before. So.
All right, now, Richard, you got one more before we...
Yeah, well, I've got maybe two. Maybe sneak a third in there as well. Sorry. So one of the things that I found most interesting, and I guess I get this coming from the the Formula One background over in Europe, and obviously with your driver, it's a potentially a slightly difficult question to answer, but you are seeing more and more guys coming over from Formula One. I mean, you've had Takuma Sato, Rubens Barrichello, obviously Alexander Rossi, Max Chilton, guys like that, come over and be successful. And they're often sort of introduced as, this guy from Formula One and all this sort of stuff. And I find that a little bit frustrating because these guys they're either called the retired Formula One driver or a Formula One reject. And I find that massively unfair because these guys are all super fast. And when you get to the Formula One level, IndyCar level, and NASCAR level, the difference between the top guys and the second, and even the top guys and the bottom guys is so minute that it's it's very unfair to turn around and call these guys a has-been or whatever. And in a way, I wish that these guys would come in and people wouldn't talk about their Formula One background as much because they're drivers, they're racers, they're damn good at what they do on their own level, and I think it can be a little bit disrespectful to these guys at times.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, there are some guys who, like Max Chilton, I don't put him on the same level as Alex.
I think I'd agree with that.
Right? And Rubens was kind of on the downward swing of his career.
I mean,
he came over here and kind of floundered, but when you saw Alonso hop in the car at Indy and in 5 laps he was like right at speed and he came in and we were like, oh, why weren't you flat here? And he's like, well, my foot wanted to be, but my brain was not ready for it. So like it's very. Here's the difference. Having worked with Alonso at Indy, the interesting thing about the very, very top drivers is they'll come in and tell you very limited what the car is doing wrong. Like it's understeer, it's oversteer, period. Yeah. The guys who are just a notch down, just that couple tenths off, they're always like, we might find something that reduces understeer, but it's more uncomfortable to drive, and they won't deal with it. So they'll say, yeah, it was an understeer reduction, but it was a bad understeer reduction. Yeah. Whereas a guy like Alonso will be like, yeah, it was understeer reduction. Bam, let's do it. I remember with Alonso, one of the things at Indy, you kind of gradually trim out to go faster and faster. And he was like stunned at the end of the first day why we didn't just show up with the fastest car we could possibly do. And we're like, well, It doesn't really work like that.
And you've got a month almost to work through it rather than, two 90-minute sessions like they have in a Formula One car.
Yeah, exactly right. Yes. And you're on the edge more at Indy than you are on a road and street course. Like you can save the car on a road and street course 90% of the time. On an oval, you can't.
So I guess Indy, every 10 seconds, you're a blink of an eye away from sticking it in the wall, aren't you? At a pretty high speed.
Yeah, and a 150G impact.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that wakes you up pretty quickly, I'm sure. Another question I have is, one thing I've always said, and especially having lived over here for a while now, one of the things that I think IndyCar struggles with at times is there are so many fantastic road courses, and especially road courses in this country. I mean, brilliant road courses that IndyCar just doesn't go to, whether that's for financial or political reasons or whatever it may be. If you could pick any course that you don't go to now and you take an IndyCar to, where would it be to race?
Well, I'd go back to Watkins Glen. I love that place.
Yeah.
It's so fast and so high commitment. And I like Mossport. You said this country, but Mossport again.
Yeah, this continent.
Mossport.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to think. I guess my thing was I love high commitment circuits like Road America or circuits like that. Mid Ohio is for sure one.
And I think sometimes when you look at some of these, I think Coda's a great circuit out there in Texas, but it's almost, with the way it's designed, these modern Formula One circuits, it's just too anemic almost. There's a driver can make a mistake and he just runs across 6 acres worth of asphalt that doesn't really cause him any trouble, and he gets back on and tries again. Some of these circuits that you guys go to, you're in a farmer's field if you make a mistake, and it's great to watch. I love it. And final question: I'm on a sort of an enforced hiatus from motorsport at the moment. So if you've got any jobs going, you got Frank's details. Just let Frank know. I'll give you a call. Okay.
It seems like we always need people like IndyCar series. The I don't know if NASCAR is the same, but it seems like the age of the workforce is really going up at a linear rate, like 1 year every year, and it doesn't seem like there's young people coming in. So we're really struggling to when they talk about adding cars every year, I'm always like, where are we going to get people?
It's a hard industry, isn't it? I mean, as you say, especially for you guys, the sort of hours you work. I mean, that's all I've ever done pretty much has been motorsport, and at the moment I'm working for an engineering company that isn't in motorsport, and as soon as it hits 4 o'clock, that place is empty, and I'm like, I just don't. It's quite hard to motivate yourself when you've grown up in that environment, and people who haven't worked in motorsport don't understand that. The getting home at 3 o'clock in the morning after a test event or a race or whatever it is, it's exhausting, but you know what? It's so much fun in a very strange and perverse way.
It is. It's the competition and it's the team aspect that I keep doing. Like, I've looked at getting out. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, I can't drive a car to save my life apart from a road car, but so for me, as I was lucky. I was able to combine my engineering background with motorsport, which was my, something I enjoyed as a kid. So I've been very, very lucky to be able to combine those two. But, as you said, the competitive edge of it, because if you're there till 10 o'clock, then somebody else is going to be there till 11 o'clock.
Well, there's people in the sport that work in the sport, and then there's racers.
Yeah,
and that's the difference.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I like. That when I said I come home and I work a few more hours, like we just built a new house. And this is the first time I've ever had a home office. So normally I would just stay at work and work late, really late at work. And now I can come home, and it's like my favorite thing to do is like come home, log into the VPN, and just get back into it. And I really,
a lot of people don't understand that. It's a very, it's great, isn't it? It's a very strange lifestyle that people live in racing, but it's quite addictive. It's good fun.
Jeremy, you have been a great guest tonight. Now IndyCar is off to Mid-Ohio, which is pretty much your home Grand Prix right there. You're from Ohio. You've probably been to the track as a kid. Word on the street is that you grew up in the hood in Ohio. Although Rossi says that you think you're hood, but you're not. But anyway, so generally what we do, we always make picks for the race. And who do you like, Jeremy? You think maybe that Rossi kid's going to win in Mid-Ohio?
I think we have a good shot. We didn't test there, so I don't know kind of where our performance is. It was one of the tracks we chose not to test at because we were pretty strong there last year. But if you look at the recent tests coming up, it looks like Robert Wickens, he had a half second on the field at the last test, so it looks like they'll be pretty strong. So
he deserves to win, I think, doesn't he?
Yeah, man, that guy's a masher. I like him a lot. And it's funny because him and Alex keep running into each other, but like literally 10 minutes afterwards, they're like, "Oh, what are you doing this weekend?" And they're like, off and chumming again. So
yeah, the media try to make something of it, don't they? And if you ask what the drivers really think, a lot of the times they're,
Well, I think they're angry for a few hours, right? And then it's like, whatever, next one. So
because probably if the roles were reversed, they'd have probably done exactly the same thing.
Oh, for sure.
It's so funny because last week our guest was James Hinchcliffe's brother, Christopher, who wrote the book Chasing Checkers, and he was talking about Wickens, who he's known since he's like 10 years old. He's like, oh, Robbie said this and Robbie said that. I'm like, okay, I've never called him Robbie, but thank you for that. So, but yeah, Wickens will be good in Mid-Ohio. So will Rossi. And let's go throw around the panel quick for a pick. Gray, who you like for Mid-Ohio?
How can you go against Scott Dixon?
You work for Alexander Rossi.
Yeah, and he wasn't. He had 2 massive crashes at the last test.
Yes, he did. So,
and they weren't fast there last year. They finished 9th there last year, I think, or 8th there last year. So
that's still great, hasn't it? Damn, there you go.
There you go. I mean, all right.
He's leading the points, and he's won there more than anybody. So
yes, he has. That's a good pick, Gray. Richard, who do you like? Who do you like for Mid-Ohio?
I'm going to say Joseph Newgarden.
Always a good pick, yeah. Newgarden can win any day. Joey, who you like?
Well, first off, I'll say that it's nice to have Pietro Fittipaldi come back after his injury. He's coming back this weekend at Mid-Ohio, so that's really good to see. That said, Jeremy, thanks for coming on the show. It's been fun. But I'm going to have to go with Pietro's teammate, Sebastian Bourdais, this weekend.
Another good pick right there, but I'll just go out on a limb, and I'll go with Rossi. Just because I like Jeremy, I think you've got this down. So, but Jeremy, thanks again for coming on. But let us let you go. I know you're busy. You probably want to get back to the laptop or get back to the family. So, just let us know where we can follow you on social media.
I'm not really on it.
Okay, yeah.
Facebook account. That's about it.
I noticed your last tweet was in 2016. But we can follow. We can follow the team. Andretti. Yeah. Is Andretti on track, right? Or we can follow. Alexander Rossi. Indycar.com. You can catch up with stories there. Some of them written by Mr. Joey Barnes. So.
Hey, social media is overrated, man. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Well, I don't think I could control my tongue. I'm not that good at it. So.
I've had to delete a number of things. That's all I can say.
I can't afford the fines.
Jeremy, I've enjoyed catching up with you, and when I see Tommy again, I'll give him your regards.
Yeah, and Slugger, if you see him too.
Oh, I see him. He's got a gig with Toyota now. So
Slugger's living the good life right now.
Yeah, I think he's doing all the NHRA stuff for Toyota. So I imagine he's in Sonoma this weekend. Yeah. I run into him from time to time. I see Tommy about once or twice a month. So we'll let him know we caught up.
All right. Well. I guess.
Yeah, thanks again for coming on the show. Again, guys, Jeremy Milless from Andretti Autosport. Keep your eye on that 27 car. Championship contender for sure. If not this year, certainly next. So, but Gray, Joey, you guys want to talk about Formula One next, or you want to talk about the NASCAR?
Who cares about NASCAR?
Gray
does. He works for them. Or he works with them, so.
I cash my check every week, yeah. So look, we'll talk. We'll do the NASCAR. Really, not a lot to talk about there. We went to Loudon, and again, the big three, as they've been called, pretty much came to the forefront again. It was all about Truex, Harvick, and Kyle Busch. And it ended up to be a pretty exciting finish there at the end. Kyle Busch had the lead, and Harvick was able to chase him down and use the old bump and run to get around. I think
bumped him a few times just to let him know, hey, I'm coming.
He had Kyle knew it. Kyle was backing up the corners, trying to stay ahead of him. He knew what was coming, and basically it opens the door for a return in a race down the road somewhere, and we'll see it. But good racing. I mean, you like to see good aggressive racing and guys, getting up there and racing for the win, and that's the show they gave us. Much like the show we had at Chicago between Kyle Larson and Kyle Busch. So yeah, I like it when it gets a little bit feisty like that, and it ended up being a good race. But again, like I said, the dominance of the big three, Harvick, Busch, and Truex, they the cream rose to the top again. And of course, the race got off to a little bit of a rocky start with the rain delay, but they were able to get the whole race in, and it was good. And that's the kind of finishes we need to see. And we'll take that and move on to Pocono this coming weekend.
I tell you who really impressed me, Big Three aside, was and he's impressed me all year, would be Eric Almirola. I mean,
absolutely.
He went in there this past weekend, led a bunch of laps. I actually thought he was going to get the win, but I think that goes to show also just the level of just where they are as an organization, because top to bottom, there's not a weakness at Stewart-Haas Racing right now. There's not a weak link in a driver and an engineering perspective. When you see what they've been able to do, especially with Ford, I mean, this is only their second year with Ford, and we see what they're doing. They're putting everybody else to the woodshed from an organizational standpoint, because top to bottom, Gibbs isn't running like this. Hendrick's not running like this. Chevy is starting to find their footing with this Camaro finally, and we're starting to see good results out of Chase Elliott, and Jimmy Johnson's starting to look a little bit like Jimmy Johnson that we're used to seeing. But I tell you what, it's going to be really difficult if they can somehow manage to get, and they should. I mean, there's 16 entries in the playoff system now, which is way too much when you run 35 cars every week. But there's going to be all four of those guys in the championship playoffs, and I tell you what, it's going to be tough to bump any of them out, because I feel like the further along we go, especially with guys like Almirola and Clint Boyer, who are still kind of new to that organization, the more they develop, I think that we're going to see this organization continue to take leaps and bounds forward. And I mean, I don't think it's going to be an all-organization Final Four. I think that right there would just be crazy. But if there is one organization that you could look at and say maybe, I think that, especially when you look at the fact that Harvick and maybe even Clint Boyer and Kurt Busch could already punch their ticket if they continue to reel off playoff points, then really it's just on Almirola to go out there and get the job done. And I think that it's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities with this organization.
They could realistically put two in the Final Four. I mean, to go along with the Joe Gibbs and a Furniture Row entry. That's someone else to join Harvick. But you're absolutely right. Almirola ran good, and I think and Busch, he got his third or fourth pole of the year. Kurt did, and he looked pretty strong there for a while. And both of those teams, the 41 and the 10, are on the cusp of winning races. You're exactly right. And, top to bottom, they are the strongest organization in the sport right now.
Richard, you had a question?
Yeah, I mean, you point there about, Stewart-Haas Racing there. I mean, you're right. They've got, no weak links in their lineup right now. Almirola's come in there, and he's adapted to that setup and that organisation pretty well. My only comment would be, if you compare them to a Hendrick, you look at Hendrick, and they've got, obviously Jimmy is the sort of elder statesman of that team, but then they've also got three, pretty young guys who are obviously there for the future. Would you be concerned about Stewart-Haas's sort of long-term setup? I mean, because I don't know the exact age of the drivers, but I know, Harvick's in his 40s now, isn't he? I think Boyer's probably getting up there. Kurt Busch is probably late 30s. Almirola's, early 30s?
Mid-30s. I see where you're going with it. Here's what I'll say, though. When you have that kind of feedback, you would have thought that Hendrick, with the group that they have in place, could have fed off of setups and development work that Jeff Gordon and Dale Earnhardt Jr. had left there, and that William Byron could kind of pick up. Granted, this is also the transition with the new car, so maybe if there's Cole Custer comes in, and if he's the next in line for a Cup opportunity, if one of those guys retires, you kind of wonder, well, if we end up with a new Ford, which I believe is coming, it kind of makes you wonder, like, are they going to struggle just as much?
Yeah, I think Hendrick and all the Chevy teams have struggled. They've had a double hit this year. They've had, the new Hawkeye system and the new bodywork, so there's no datum for them to work off. In the past when a new body's come in, they've always had the old setup and the old rule system to play off. It's carried over from year to year. Or if they've had a new method of inspecting cars, at least they've had the same bodywork. So they've been hit, I think, pretty badly by having those two new things come along at exactly the same time.
I don't think you're going to see the drop off with the Mustang in the Cup Series when it arrives that you saw with Chevrolet. I think with the commitment that Ford has made into the sport in the last 2 to 3 years, I don't think they're going to get caught flat-footed like Chevrolet did. I think they may miss a slight beat at the beginning of the year, but I think they're going to be more prepared and going to have their ducks in a row. And I think one of the things and we've discussed this at the shop, they worked on that Chevrolet Camaro for 2 years prior to its introduction, but they were working off what they presumed were going to be the rules at that time as they went along. One of the biggest things that has hurt the Chevrolet is that car was designed to run with more of a splitter and running the old rules with the splitter that we used to run. And NASCAR changed the downforce rules as while that car was being developed. And I think that's one of the things that's caught Chevrolet somewhat off guard, and they're having to catch up in that respect. So, it remains to be seen what, if Ford, as they put this Mustang through the thing, and basically from the nose back, the car's not going to change a whole lot. So I don't see Ford being caught in the same situation that Chevrolet was.
Well, here's what I'll say about this before we move on, because I know we don't have much time left, is the splitter and coil binding are the two things that, in my opinion, have hurt NASCAR the most, because that's what's made the racing maybe not as good as it could have been, because you don't
agree with that.
as much development work, and you don't get as much from an engineering standpoint for input from crew chiefs. But that said, I think a lot of this comes from the strength of the lineups that Chevrolet possesses versus Toyota and Ford, but it also comes not just from a driver lineup, but what they also have in-house. When you look at crew chiefs, outside of Chad Canals, it's hard to really look at another Chevrolet crew chief as elite.
Yeah.
But you go and you look at Toyota and you look at Ford. I mean, you could rattle off about 5 or 6 right now for Ford, and you can do the same thing with Toyota. I think a lot of that strength doesn't come necessarily from just the car itself and the lack of feedback that drivers are giving. It also comes from how adaptive those crew chiefs and car chiefs are becoming with this car, and I think that's really the biggest hindrance for that Chevrolet progress.
And a lot of that too, with the things you just spoke about, the lineups that each manufacturer possesses right now. A lot of that comes from the manufacturer itself and the commitment that they're able to put in, because they have a huge, they put a lot of money into these programs. And I mean, and let's face it, money brings in talent and people in there too.
It's also easier, though, for Ford and for Toyota, because outside of NASCAR, they don't really have a huge commitment anymore to another realm of motorsports.
Exactly.
I mean, when you look at Chevrolet, I mean, they're an Indycar. They've got a lot of stuff in NHRA. They're quite developed when it comes to, like Ford is with IMSA, but beyond that, it's there's not much there. Now, if Toyota and Ford could dabble a little bit in IndyCar, we'll see how much commitment they really want to put in NASCAR. But if they don't want to go play with big boys on a big Indianapolis 500 track, then I don't.
That's true. I mean,
put all their money in NASCAR.
That's right. All their eggs are in one basket, so to speak.
Yeah, so.
All right, guys. So we've only got a couple minutes left to talk about the Formula One race, but let's real quick go around the table. NASCAR, we're heading to Pocono next. I'm going to go ahead and pick Ryan Blaney and let y'all have what's left.
Truex.
Yeah.
Richard, you said Truex?
Yeah.
All right, Gray?
I got to go with Harvick. He's been strong there the last few races.
Harvick's been on fire this year, yeah. Joey, who do you like for Pocono?
Kurt Busch.
Kurt Busch. Kurt Busch could use a win this year. You're darn right. So, with that being said, Richard, so Formula One was at the Hockenheim ring this week. Lewis Hamilton had through grid penalties and poor qualifying, started 14th, ended up on the top of the podium at the end of the day. Vettel had a mistake that was all of his own doing, by his own account.
It was gifted to Hamilton, if we're being honest.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, call it what you want. I don't think that Sebastian Vettel was wrapping a gift for Hamilton when he had a mistake or made a mistake.
Toto Wolff was when he said, Valtteri, don't challenge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I'll let you all talk about it. Go ahead.
I mean, I think you look at the three races that had gone previously in, Mercedes had the dominant car at all three of those races and didn't come out with the most number of points. Then you look at, this weekend in Hockenheim that's just gone, Ferrari, had the quickest car, but they didn't come out with the most number of points. So certainly the last 3 or 4 races, you've seen a scenario where people with the fastest car have not been achieving the optimum results. It was purely weather-induced at Hockenheim. I don't think that if it had been dry, Vettel would have walked away with that race. I don't think that he would have made that mistake in the dry. One thing that I do want to raise is the lack of penalty for Hamilton and for what he did. To sort of give you a brief overview of what happened, they were in the pit stop cycle or in the pit window when the safety car came out after Vettel's accident. I believe Kimi pitted, so as literally as Hamilton was entering the pit lane, he aborted and went across the grass and rejoined the track. Now, that is against the rules. It clearly states that a driver must not enter the pit lane and then return to the track post without driving through the pit lane. For him not to get a penalty and purely get a reprimand, I think is pretty poor, and not with a totally neutral hat in here, not a sort of for or against Hamilton in any manner. The rules are there. The argument that the reason he was given a reprimand is because it was under a safety car and it was low speed. Well, yeah, but if you drive through a red light in your road car, you're driving through a red light. It doesn't matter how fast you're going.
Yeah. Rules are rules.
Exactly. And I mean, in NASCAR, if you pass that commitment code and jump back on the track, you will get penalised for it.
Right. Commitment line violation, and they stick it to anybody.
I think you've got to. I think he got away very, very, very lightly there. And I mean, in reality, you wouldn't do that under normal racing conditions. That wouldn't come around. So I don't think the justification for not penalising him and saying that, it was because it was under the safety car and it was low speed, doesn't really wash with me, that one. I think that was a slightly politically motivated
yeah, you're right. The rules need to be black and white. I mean, it's right or it's wrong. It's a penalty or it's not. It's not, because it's rainy or because it's slow or because it's Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, so I agree with you.
Well, Kimi got the same penalty in Azerbaijan last year, I think it was. Now, that is a far faster pit lane entry at Azerbaijan, so you could. But again, you've got to set these things in stone, and it causes confusion amongst the fans. It's like, well, hang on.
It'll suck if that's the championship right there.
Well, you could say that about anything, couldn't you? You could say, the penalty that Vettel got for hitting Bottas in Paul Ricard, or any of these penalties that they get thrown at.
It just seems that it was arbitrarily enforced, and that's the look it has.
I like that they're looking at the variables, because that tells me that they're trying to take each situation uniquely. But whenever you have similar situations and they're not called consistently, that's where it's a little bit more skewed. And I feel like, this kind of feels like Bernie all over again, doesn't it? You kind of get something, but maybe you don't get anything. Yeah. Oh, Verstappen did a double move. We're not going to penalize him. He does a double move to his teammate, and I love Daniel Ricciardo because he doesn't care if Verstappen does a double move. He's not letting off the second move. No. That's why they've collided so many times lately. It's totally asinine.
I mean, it's the whole, you've got to set a precedent, and the rule is there. The rule is black and white. There's no sort of interpretation of the rule there. The only problem with Formula 1 is the penalties are not consistent enough. You should have it that if if you hit another driver in an avoidable contact, you get a 10-second penalty, not a, well, it depends how hard it is, because that's when it becomes open to interpretation. That's when you can get bias. If you have a rule and somebody breaks it, this is your penalty. Not, don't try and have staggered penalties, because it just creates an unknown for the fans.
Yeah. What's the next Formula One race?
Hungaroring this weekend.
Okay, so we got about 15 seconds for picks before we have to get off the air. So I'll start with you, Gray. Who do you like for Hungaroring?
Vettel rebounds. Joey.
Kimi, because Ferrari's not going to let Sergio Marchionne's death go without a win.
But not Vettel? Okay. Richard, who you like?
Gray already picked Vettel.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Ricciardo.
All right, so that leaves me Lewis Hamilton.
You don't want to take a Mercedes at Hungaroring. That car is not built for that track.
No.
Okay. I'll take Max Verstappen then. But I'll tell you who I won't pick is Lance Stroll, whose daddy evidently is buying him his own Formula One team, if you believe reports. But we'll talk about that more next week as more information comes in. But until then, I want to thank you, Gray, Richard, Joey. I want to thank our guest, Jerry Milless, for coming on tonight. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network and iHeartRadio and all you folks that tune in to listen. And we'll talk to you in a week. Good night.